Here to tell us more all about that is Colin and Thijs, so please give them a welcome as they come up to stage.
Well, that has been a marvellous introduction to what Thijs and I want to talk about. We're going to take a little bit of a less technical dive, right, Thijs?
I'm tempted.
But we are going to be talking about next generation streaming networks and optimization, and we're going to actually be looking at a lot of the business cases behind why you should be doing this as opposed to the hard technical data. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. So Thijs, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about IMAX, if there's anybody who maybe hasn't heard of IMAX.
Yeah, and happy to do that. We're not going to practice how my first and last name is pronounced. It's pretty Dutch, Thijs Bijleveld. IMAX, yeah, who doesn't know IMAX? I guess, right, 40 years ago we went to the cinemas and we really wanted to have that immersive experience. We went to an IMAX cinema. But what is IMAX doing in this room? And that's probably what we are going to chat about. IMAX is all about quality, but our starting point when we think about quality, that has been, you know, producing cameras, projectors in our cinemas, but now also taking the experience into the home, is about how does the human brain perceive quality, right? Might be the same if we're measuring pixels or bits, but yeah, I think the point that we found throughout those 40 years is that the human brain is actually the starting point where you need to deal with quality.
So we live in a very difficult time for the delivery of content. We are spanning screens from 6 inches, maybe smaller than 6 inches, all the way up to 6 feet. And we tend to think, but when we think about quality, we tend to think about bandwidths. Talk to us a little bit about why that might be the wrong way to be thinking about things.
Yeah, happy to do that, but let's take one step back. When we talk about quality first, right? Let's establish why does it matter, right? So when we are thinking quality, right? And when we are trying to increase quality, like you said, adding more pixels and therewith, you know, requiring more bandwidth is not necessarily how you should look at quality and quality improvement. So, in other words, quality matters, right? If you want to increase, right, your viewer engagement, right? If you want to think about, connecting your viewers to your screen longer and more effectively, you need to deal with quality. If you want to prevent people churning off, you know, increased quality is a very effective measure. But to your point, you know, if you're just adding bits and increase bandwidth, that's not how the human brain works. What we have been doing since 40 years is trying to understand basically the human visual system. If you go to an IMAX cinema, if you went to an IMAX cinema 40 years ago, there was already back then a bunch of engineers trying to crack things like, all right, what is actually the human eye looking at in that whole big screen? How are we looking at visual impairment, right? How is an increase of resolution actually being perceived by the human brain? That's leads to a situation where we discovered that just adding bits and bandwidth is not necessarily adding quality.
Yeah, I must admit I've spent a lot of time watching sport, particularly sport, on a variety of streaming services, and found, well, first of all, some claiming to be HD, some claiming to be UHD, and I couldn't see a difference. Although apparently the bandwidths were very, very different. So when we think about measuring quality, what does it mean in this context?
Well, as I said earlier, I think if we think about measuring quality, we actually want to measure, we want to end up with a metric, or we want to measure something that comes as close as you can to basically the human viewing system, right? So you can measure a lot of things in a visual. what we discovered in that sense is that if you understand, the mapping the viewing mapping of a human brain, and you translate that into a code, into a metric, and you apply that, for example, on video streams, and you also understand what's the device type, what's the viewing circumstance that people are in, right? You can then start determining what's actually in that video file that doesn't add anything to that quality perception. So it's the other way around. If you want to increase quality, or if you want to optimize basically your streaming operations, right? A, what's your benchmark? So you need to have a reliable score. You need to have a reliable metric, right? That brings you as close to how your viewers are perceiving quality. And then step two, you can start thinking on, how do we actually, in a very simple word, how can we actually just pull out every bit and every line of code that's in that video file that doesn't make any sense?
And that's, I think, the startling thing for me when I look at this. You have this, you actually do have an index, a quality index, which is based on perception rather than bandwidth values.
Yeah.
And when I look, I can look at two video streams that have the same measure. They look identical to me, and they're one is 20, 30% smaller.
Yeah.
And that's you figuring out what matters in the video for human perception, right?
Yeah, and as I said, right, the human perception is in a sort of a diverse setup, because it depends on where you are, depends on what device type you have, and so all these things need to be taken into consideration if you're applying that metric. But yeah, a use case, right, that we can talk about. IMAX works with, many of the studios started to work 2 years ago with Disney streaming services, and they used VMAF in the past, but VMAF is a very good perceptual quality metric, but it has its challenges, right? Ideally, you want to have a metric that basically runs on basically any content type, right? You want to ideally use a metric that's able to perform at scale, right? And not only in on-demand workflows, but ideally, right, even in a live workflow, right? So that's where we started our conversation with Disney. And what we then did, so the metric was applied, the perceptual quality metric, but we then started to look at their on-demand streams, and how it actually works is we run an orchestrating layer on top of their existing encoder workflow. So no story sticks if the story starts with you need to just replace all your encoding infrastructure. So we run it on top, and each and every stream we take a couple of additional transcodes, and then we basically benchmark that against the metric and say how low can we go in terms of bit rate to still meet that perceptual quality score. And if you do it per segment, then you stitch together, right, that stream at the end. We ended up over 2023 with a $23 million cost saving on their overall CDN cost. That's quite significant, right? And if you think about it, it's actually quite simple. On the one hand side, you need to have a reliable metric that you believe in. So we believe in a perceptual quality metric, and then you start saying, all right, what's the stuff that's in the stream that simply doesn't make sense, but is adding bits and is adding bandwidth? That's Disney in a nutshell.
Yep, and having used their quality metric, I can tell you it is pretty reliable at comparing two quality streams at the same perceptual level. It's pretty accurate. Now, okay, great. So we've got this way of measuring the perceptual quality rather than the real quality, and we can reduce the bandwidth. But why are we doing this? Why does quality really matter?
As I said, I think quality matters because quality directly relates to viewer engagement, right? It helps you to reduce churn. But in essence, right, if you are able to increase your video quality, you're able to ask a premium on that. We prove that every day. Last weekend or this weekend, we actually had our June 2 premiere, and I'm just taking the parallel to what's happening in the cinemas. We had a box office, all record of 22.1%, basically going to an IMAX version of Dune 2, right? People have an option. You can go to an IMAX or a non-IMAX version. Why is 22.1% of all viewers on the opening weekend actually choosing to watch that film in an IMAX setup? That's apparently because people are willing to pay a premium for quality content.
And I can tell you, during the World Cup, I upgraded to an Ultra HD level of my, I live in the States, the virtual MVPD that I was using, YouTube TV, and promptly downgraded again because I saw no difference in the visual context. So there's a great revenue example, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why upgrade to that if you don't get the quality? There are other benefits though, right?
Well, I think the other benefits, because look, quality matters because you can increase revenue, you can prevent churn. But the other thing to basically look critically at perceptual quality is also, like I just earlier said, it's a means to optimize your streaming business. Very simply, if you apply the right quality metric and you are optimizing your streaming operations, yeah, you can reduce your CDM bill. But there's other advantages as well, right? If you optimize basically your video files, you end up with smaller packages that you need to just process through your workflow, right? So it has an impact on latency. It has an impact on video startup time. So we are currently, applying this quality metric and optimization in live workflows as well. Yeah, with your processing, you're adding, say, like 500 milliseconds of processing time to your workflow, but reducing that file size by 15 to 25% actually leads to a positive, effect on your overall latency. So the fact that you are measuring quality and that you're optimizing your workflow in a live context even helps you to reduce latency, which is a big deal in many live sports workflows.
So that's a pretty remarkable idea, right? That not only can you deliver the same visual quality at a lower bandwidth, it also has beneficial effects on reducing things like buffering,
yeah,
and faster startup times. It also, we saw great data from Colin earlier about the massive increase in bandwidth requirements, which is causing more bandwidth problems. Right?
Yep.
So multicast is one approach, but this is something that an individual provider can do today to actually optimize their delivery, improve their quality, both in terms of visual quality and in terms of reliability of delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and look, probably we can say, we have been doing things all wrong, right? Streamers have been basically increasing their file size because they wanted to perceive better video quality. But you know what? It's also kind of a hard job, right? On the one hand side to increase quality, and on the other hand side have the CFO on your neck saying, you know what, you need to do things 10, 15, 20% cheaper. It seems to be a contradiction. And also, to be honest, to be fair, so far it was kind of hard to basically apply a perceptual quality metric in a workflow that was constrained, which was really, all about, reducing latency. Because, and the other aspect, of course, is scale. How do you apply this perceptual quality measurement, right, in a context where you're doing 10, 15, or maybe even 50,000, viewing hours per year? It's not easy. So we also needed to fix a couple of things to basically come up with a metric that was able to support that scale, right? And then you need to think about how can you do that cleanup operation in a way that it still, enables you to run your live workflow without any impact. The other thing that we thought hard about is making changes, right, to your existing encoder workflow is extremely difficult. It's extremely impacting. And by the way, right, we don't pretend here that we are doing a better encoding job. We're optimizing basically the video file, but we're not touching the encoding process in that sense. But a lot of these pieces needed to fall together, right? So a better quality metric, but also the optimization in a live context, not touching the existing workflow, wasn't there yet. So I think that also it's fair to say that the streamers didn't do anything wrong. I think we just needed to hurry up and kind of apply what we learned in the past 40 years in cinemas and find a way to apply that into, let's say, current streaming era.
And that's a very important point. If to reduce the bandwidth required massive replacement of equipment in somebody's network, then it's probably lose a lot of the savings, right?
Oh, and that's it. And I think one of the other things is we also thought about how do we enable the industry, right? So coming up with this story and say you need to just pay us a couple of million up front and we'll simply get going. Oh, and by the way, you also need to just completely replace half of your encoding workflow. Yeah, good luck, right? That's a solution on paper, but nobody's able to sell that internally. So also that required, right, a bit of a disruptive thinking, which I think is now coming together as we speak.
So I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball here at you.
Oh, great! I didn't expect that one.
So one of the things that we tend to do in our industry is we just wait, we throw bandwidth at it, we throw computing power at it. That fixes everything, right? So why, if I just wait, won't bandwidth fix the problem?
Yeah, but there's a price to pay for that. So in other words, I can wear the CFO hat and say, look, bandwidth, whether you already have put a sort of an existing infrastructure in place, or even whether you own your own network infrastructure or not, what's the problem? But everything has a cost, right? If you are streaming over somebody else's network, right, it's definitely a concern, right? Because at this point in time, right, each and every new customer, every stream, right, is ending up in additional CDN costs, so that's a concern. But we could also look at it from a sort of a non-financial perspective, right? Because you can look at it from a product perspective and say, you know what, going forward, that bandwidth will be used for other products and other propositions as well, right? So you can say, you know what, there's bandwidth available, so if you need more bandwidth on the video side, problem solved. But what's happening on the broadband side, right? How are we going to grow our business there? And the third thing is, look, adding bandwidth in more and more companies, they also think about, other aspects like sustainability, right? Yeah, you can add a bunch of servers and burn more electricity to kind of get your operations running, but there's also a tendency to think, if we basically optimize our business, our streaming business with, 20% plus, yeah, it also has an effect of just using less power, to basically run your operation. So you choose whatever driver you wanna jump on. But quite frankly, the fact that in future bandwidth is solving the problem is simply not true, because there's a price to it. There's always a price to it.
There is, and looking at the graphs that Colin showed, not just of the average, but of the peaks, what's very clear is the more bandwidth there is, the more applications there are that use it. So this will always be a contended fabric, right?
Yeah, no, and it's true. And maybe just like a closing remark, if you see what's going on the device side, right, we will be confronted with higher grade screens, but that also means that basically the gap between your iPhone or let's say that big super duper screen is only increasing. So it's also about efficiency. You can't just blow basically the biggest definition through your encoder workflow, because you know what, somebody might have like a 70-inch OLED screen that needs to be fed. It needs to be more intelligent than that.
It does. And Thijs, this has been a great summary, I think, of some of the business benefits of delivering with lower bandwidth while maintaining the same quality.
Absolutely.
So thank you for your comments and thank you for your attention.